Hey gang, Merry Christmas. I saved a story from the last episode of Holiday Stories just so I could give you something on Christmas Day as my added bonus Christmas gift to you. This is a long one, so sit tight. I hope you enjoy it. Jim's Cabin, submitted by Anonymous. This happened in 2001. I'm not going to say where, and it doesn't really matter. But this is something that only a couple of people know about. I'm not lying. I've been married to my wife since 1996 and even she doesn't know. Why I'm telling it now? I don't know. But this did happen on Christmas of that year to me and my best friend, who was my best man in my wedding. I was the best man in his wedding, and we are still best friends to this day. That year I took a chance and started up my own business. It was a restaurant and bar, and it was a ton of work. I had so much riding on the line that I didn't even spend Christmas with my family that year. My wife's family is from Italy, and we were supposed to travel there for the holidays with our son and daughter, but I just couldn't take the time off. I had so much to get ready for a March opening, I just sent them and stayed back. Of course, my wife wasn't happy with this, but she knew what kind of pressure was riding on me in this restaurant. I had never done anything like this before, but things were looking good. The kids were still little and didn't really understand what was up, but they were excited to see their Nano and Nana in Bisnono. They left a few days before Christmas, and I just kept at it day and night with renovations of the building, planning, working with my new chef to hire his staff, and all that sort of thing. My wife called and pleaded with me to take at least Christmas Day off, and then I talked to my father-in-law, who demanded the same thing. He was a wonderful man that is still a great mentor to me. My friend Jim had just broken up with his longtime girlfriend after he caught her cheating on him with another one of our friends, and he didn't feel like traveling south to see his family. He just wanted to be on his own on Christmas. He stopped by my place and then said, "Hey, why don't we go up to my family's cabin up north?" I figured I could use a couple of days off and then just get back to work, so following my wife's wishes, I said okay. Jim's family cabin was out in the middle of nowhere, and I mean nowhere. It was right next to some state land, and a road you took there just ended abruptly with a quad path that led to the cabin. You either skied, snowmobiled, or snowshoed out to the cabin in the winter as the snow got really deep, and as far as we knew, there was nobody else out there for miles around. We got provisions together, warm clothes, a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue I'd been saving for a special occasion, shotguns, and then we took off in his Jeep. It was about a 2-hour drive to the back road, and we just cruised along listening to tunes and were talking the entire time. Jim had a lot to get off his chest and was handling his breakup kind of iffy. We got to the end of the road around noon on Christmas Eve day, strapped on our snowshoes, threw packs on our back, and started the hike to the cabin. It was about a mile in, and while there was a lot of snow on the ground, more was on the way as it started snowing lightly. Our moods were starting to lighten up from the gloomy talk we'd been having, and by the time we got to the cabin, we were laughing about something or other. The cabin had been built by Jim's dad and uncles about 10 years earlier and consisted of one room with bunks on one wall and a bigger bed on the other side of the building. There was a wood-burning stove with plenty of covered cordwood on the porch and more inside stacked to one side. There was a table with 4 chairs and, if I remember correctly, a rocking chair. It was pretty Spartan, but that was by design. It was mainly a hunting cabin, but did get some other use in the summer months by family and friends. There was a nice pond to the side of it, but that was long froze over by the time that we got there that year. I did notice some tracks around the side of the cabin going back into the woods, but I didn't say anything to Jim. We shook the snow on our bodies off on the porch, went in, and immediately got a fire going in the cast iron stove. A bunch of pots and utensils and glasses, mugs and stuff like that were on an old kitchen rack. For water, we would have to melt snow and we'd cook on the stove. As Jim got to work getting the fire going, I set up sleeping bags and took out all the other stuff. Most of the food we brought was dry or canned. I know, a restaurateur's nightmare. But this was not the kitchen I was building back at work. It would have to do, and honestly, it was kind of fun. I grabbed 2 clean glasses, poured 2 generous scotches, and then went outside and broke off an icicle from the roof, dropped a piece in each glass, and it didn't take long for the cabin to get warm, and we sat down at the table and raised our glasses. To friendship, I said. We clinked glasses and downed the scotch. As I said, it was starting to snow lightly, and I finally started to relax. It was warm, the scotch was warming me from the inside, and we just kind of sat there letting our problems slide away. "Hey, before we get too juiced up, want to go out and take a walk in the woods?" Jim asked. I shrugged and said, "Yeah, why not? Let's work up an appetite, come back for dinner, and then I'm going to spend the rest of the night whipping your ass in cribbage." He laughed, and we got up, put our boots and outdoor clothes on, grabbed the 2 shotguns, and out into the snow we went after shutting the stove door a bit. We wandered around for an hour or two just checking things out and looking at the tracks of the animals out there. I had only been hunting once, but did enjoy shooting. Jim was the more outdoorsy guy. Our camping trips mostly consisted of shooting targets or clay pigeons, and then getting soused at night around a fire. Still young and silly. He pointed out some tracks that looked man-made. "Who the hell would be wandering around out here at this time of year?" I asked. Jim shook his head. "Who knows? There's lots of snowmobiling around here, but just not through the woods. It is kind of odd." I said. "Maybe somebody got lost or broke down and was just looking for a shortcut somewhere." "Hey, maybe it was Sasquatch," Jim replied, laughing. I laughed too, and we went back to the cabin. It was about 4 in the afternoon. It was just starting to get dark, so I brought my gear in and let it thaw on a big rubber mat just inside the door, and man, was it warm in the cabin. I got 2 cans of soup out and dumped them in a Dutch oven, sliced up some nice bread we bought, toasted that in the skillet, and then poured another scotch. Jim was busy checking something on the chimney outside, and he came in and saw me in the rocking chair in front of the fire and followed suit. He locked the cabin door and looked outside and said, "Man, we got back just in time. It's really coming down now." He joined me at the stove, and we started talking about relationships again until we got the soup and bread off the stove and sat at the table for dinner. I was slicing a piece of cheese and asked Jim if he ever felt worried about being alone this far away from everything. He was about to answer, and there was a thump on the side wall of the cabin. We looked at each other and figured it was just a tree branch and went back to eating. We cleaned everything up and set to playing some cribbage while listening to a local radio station crackle over the speakers of a survival radio that was in the cabin. I hate country music, but that's all we could get in. After another scotch or two, there was another loud thump on the side, so Jim got up, grabbed his shotgun, and went out onto the porch. I followed him, and when we got to the side, there was nothing there, but there were more footprints coming and going from the woods. He said. "This is odd. Who would be out here in this kind of weather walking around? And if they wanted something, why not just knock on the door?" We went back in, sat down, and started talking about my new venture with the restaurant, and that's when the knock at the door came. We both turned slowly and just stared at it for what seemed like forever. It came again, and Jim went over to it and opened it a crack. On the porch was this really skinny guy wearing a jacket better suited for spring, ski pants and boots. No hat, no gloves. He was shivering and asked if he could come in. How were we going to let him stay out in that stuff with the way he was dressed? We let him in and shut the door. "My name's Bill," he said. Not his real name, mind you. I was out on my friend's snowmobile and we got separated, and I've been looking for him everywhere. I got lost and saw your cabin. Can I use your phone? Now, I did have a cell phone, but it sure as hell didn't work out here. And maybe it would if we drove back down the road a ways, but I sure as hell wasn't going to do that with the booze in my belly and the storm going on outside. And how could this guy possibly think there was a landline way out here? Something was fishy. "No phone," said Jim, "but you're welcome to stay a bit and see if your friend shows up here too. If not, maybe we can run you into town tomorrow." Yeah, that's good," said Bill. Something made me not trust this guy one fucking bit, and I decided to keep an eye on him. "You want something to eat?" Jim offered, and got him some of the snacks that we had brought. I had another scotch and sat down on my bed, just sort of looking at this guy, sizing him up. He had weird marks on his face. Not like acne, but like sores and other sores that were trying to heal. He was tall and skinny, I mean real skinny, and his long hair made him look very sketchy. Jim kept talking to him, but the answers to Jim's questions didn't make sense. Like how he got out this way. And he messed up his friend's name a couple of times, going from Tom to Tate and then finally Kirk. And he seemed real jittery, even though he'd been inside for a while and should have been warmed up by now. I walked over to the table and suggested we play some cards to pass the time, and we did. It was getting towards midnight, and this Kirk guy didn't show up, so we offered to let this Bill guy sleep on the floor with a blanket. We all chatted, and Jim got the stove ready for an overnight burn, and I didn't let my eyes wander too far from Bill. There was something off about him. I could feel it. I went to my bed and propped myself up with my pack, and while staving off the scotch, I drank 3 glasses of water to avoid dehydration. I also wanted to stay up and see if this guy was going to pull something. Jim killed the propane lantern light, and the faint glow of the fire was coming from the stove doors with this guy in front of it. I did fall asleep, but awoke to a strange noise that I couldn't pinpoint. But this Bill character was sitting up with his back to me, fiddling with something. Then I caught this sweetish smell that I didn't recognize. It was sweet but kind of acrid at the same time. My eyes started to close again, but I was up not much later to see Bill going through Jim's pack and some other things we had left on the table. I heard a faint jingle and realized he had just picked up the keys to the Jeep. I quietly reached over for my shotgun and yelled, "Don't you move, motherfucker! Put it back!" Bill froze. I could barely make him out, and he started stammering a bunch of incoherent shit. Jim had woken up too and went to fire up the lantern. There was Bill, wearing Jim's coat and hat with the keys in his hand. He kept blathering on, and we told him to take the coat off and sit down in one of the chairs. Jim ripped the keys away from him, and then we went through the coat pockets. Our wallets and my cell phone were stuffed in there. I can explain, Bill kept saying. Then Jim picked up a piece of aluminum foil, and that's when we figured out that this guy was some kind of junkie. Later we figured out it had to have been methamphetamine. Suddenly there was a pounding on the door, and I mean serious pounding. It sounded like there was at least 2 people out there. I went over to one of the windows to get a better look, and yep, there were 2 other guys who looked just like this dude standing right there, banging on the door. Who the fuck are they? I asked, knowing exactly that they were his friends, and this was a setup. Jim was madder than hell and picked up this scrawny guy by his pants and shirt collar. And Bill was flailing around, but he probably weighed about 110 pounds and wasn't going anywhere. Jim shoved his chin at the door and motioned for me to open it. I went over, whipped it open, and the 2 guys standing there just kind of looked in as Jim threw this Bill guy straight at him, and they all fell backwards off the porch in a heap. I slammed the door shut and locked it, and Jim dropped an emergency bar down as another precaution. They were back on their feet, pounding on the cabin and screaming that they were going to kill us and that we were dead. One came over to the window nearest my bed and slapped it with his palm, and this is where shit really hit the fan. Jim had opened the window on his side of the cabin and blindly fired his shotgun out the window. We heard a yell, and the pounding stopped, and there was just a bunch of "Holy shit! Holy shit! Holy shit!" screaming, and then the sounds of snow crunching moving away. "We'll be back! You're fucking dead! You're both fucking dead!" a voice screamed. Jim closed the window, and that began our time of writing out things until the morning. It was about 2:30, and we had a long way to go, and every once in a while we'd look out the windows to see if anyone was out there, and the brightness of the snow showed that they weren't around. "Oh shit, Jim, the Jeep," I said. He nodded and said, "We're just going to have to wait and see." I made some coffee and started packing stuff up. We both wanted out of there at first light. "Do we tell anyone about this?" Jim asked. I hadn't even thought of that. I mean, we were defending ourselves, but if someone had been shot, would these guys tell anyone? We talked slowly over and over about what had happened and what we should do. By now I was shaking with nervousness and just couldn't wait to get out of there. When light came, we slowly went out onto the porch and saw 3 sets of tracks heading off in the direction of the pond. There was a bloody sneaker just off the porch, and there was blood on the porch and in the snow. I looked at Jim and just said, "Oh, shit." He looked at the sneaker and said the shot that he took looked like it just hit someone's foot, and by the looks of the trails through the snow, they all walked away, albeit one guy likely being held up by the others. I gathered up our stuff while Jim went to get a shovel from under the cabin. I stood guard with my shotgun while Jim scooped up the bloody snow and took it over to the forest and threw it in. He did this over and over until there wasn't any more of it to see. There wasn't any other sound other than his scooping. He tossed the sneaker into a garbage bag, wrapped it up, and then put it in our other garbage bag. We made sure the stove was out, got our gear together, and put our snowshoes on. My mind went back to the Jeep. What if these guys had found it and messed it up? What if they were there waiting for us? What if they were waiting on the trail just to jump us? "Let's go," said Jim after securing the cabin. We cautiously made our way back down the trail to the Jeep, stopping every once in a while to listen for anyone that might be walking through the snow. We finally got to the Jeep and it was fine, thank God. We threw our stuff in and got going without saying a word. We barely even cleared the snow off the roof. We didn't bother warming it up, we just wanted to get out of there. We got about 2 miles down the road and Jim slowed up and looked at me and said, "What do we do?" I remember just staring blankly ahead. "What do you think?" I asked back. He paused for a long time, too. "Nothing," he said. "Bunch of fucking junkies out in the woods. Who's gonna care?" I said, "Can we take that chance?" And he said, "What do we have to lose?" I nodded and we drove on. The farther away we got, the less tense it was. I reached behind me for the bottle of scotch and took a huge belt. About halfway home, we threw our garbage out in a dumpster at a restaurant, and then we went to my house. I got out and grabbed my gear and went into my garage, and Jim followed. We went inside, and it all felt like a dream. I asked him if he wanted to spend the day and stay the night, and he said yeah. We sat down in my living room. "Merry Christmas, dude," I said. He just kept shaking his head. We never heard anything else about it. Over beers and some food that I whipped up, we talked and talked the rest of the day about whether they had a hut or a cabin someplace out there that Jim and his family had just never noticed. I just looked at how long this is, and I doubt you'll ever read it. No matter, it'll avoid all the "I call bullshit" comments for you to deal with. Anyway, my wife called later that day, and I talked to her and my kids about their Christmas and how things were going and how much I missed them. My wife got back on the phone and asked me how my Christmas was going, and I just said, I won't ever forget it. And I haven't. Hey gang. What? Did you think I wasn't going to give you something on Christmas? Merry Christmas, everybody. Happy holidays, Happy New Year, and I'll see you in 2018. Until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. Could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.